do you think that the positioning of enablement as a strategic function, what are the key benefits of doing that? And how does that impact the business performance overall?
Yes, great question. So I think to answer this, I think it's important to understand what the alternative to strategic enablement is, right? And why we have these kind of different functions. So a little bit of history on this. So if we were to go back about 5 years or so, analysts, the likes of Gartner and Forrester and those guys, they started to buzz about sales enablement and its significance, right? They even set up practices to focus on that function. Research firms also started to highlight that VCs, and Hector, you'll probably be aware of this, but VCs and private equity firms now started to consider enablement as part of their investment evaluations and even due diligence. Why? Because they started to view it as a crucial indicator of a company's ability to scale, right? So when that happened, kind of the role exploded and the function exploded. Everyone started understanding and hearing more about sales enablement. And company founders and chief revenue officers, chief sales leaders, essentially, they all suddenly wanted sales enablement, right? Whether or not they truly understood what it actually was, right? We have to have sales enablement. Because they needed to increase their valuations, they needed to secure investors, they needed to obtain funding, right? Speed up their time to market, and find that exit which they were aiming for, right? And that led essentially to two types of enablement functions forming. There was the operational, and then there was strategic, right? Operational is kind of like, we just need enablement. It does training, it does some onboarding, but that's what we want, right? And the strategic functions were slightly different. So kind of to answer the question, how are they different? What sort of impact do they have? Well, largely, a strategic enablement function is data-driven, first of all, right? And that's in terms of how they define their enablement strategy and how they prioritize the programs within it, right? Secondly, I'd say that they're revenue outcome obsessed, right? It's essentially where they start and work backwards. Thirdly, they're kind of able to correlate the leading and lagging performance indicators. Correlation is so important. I think we're going to talk about this quite a lot on today's session. This is essentially about correlating the impact of the enablement programs that they're defining to things like key behaviors, key competencies, things that essentially drive the levers of sales velocity, right? Which in turn correlates to revenue impact and impact to commissions, right? Ultimately, which is what the field is trying to achieve. Another aspect I'd say which is different is they will operate cross-functioning. So they will align, there'll be a bridge between the sales function, the customer success function, marketing, product as well, right? Because we know that those companies who are aligned in that way typically generate higher rates of return in terms of revenue. So that's something that they will do, is be the glue between those cross-functional teams. Another difference is they will typically report into the chief sales officer, chief revenue officer, which is so important, and I'll kind of explain why. They're visibly aligned to business strategy as well. And I say the word visibly with an emphasis on that, because sometimes it can be aligned to business strategy, but the perception is that you're not. Right? That makes a difference. So visibly aligned. So it is as an extra emphasis to that. And that in turn means they have a seat at the revenue top table. Right? They're not just a tactical operational function driving certain initiatives. They're actually driving strategy, right? And an impact to that strategy. And this ultimately, and this is not said enough, right? This ultimately means that they're compensated better than a non-strategic function, right? Typically, they will have a variable bonus scheme that in some ways aligned to a quota, not a quota carrying role, but aligned to quota, as opposed to the standard company bonus schemes, like an annual bonus schemes, right? That's usually a red flag for me. When I hear that, I think, you're not seeing the value, right? So here's my take on this. And overall, like an operation enablement function typically will impact revenue by something around 5%, right? Which might be enough for companies, and they're doing a great job. It's a great people in that team. They're outputting loads of content and loads of training going on and all of that. About 5%, right? Whereas the strategic function could be upwards of 15%. That's the difference. That's the difference, right? This is a big ROI on enablement. And this is, I think, backed up by what Gartner and Forrester have just said, like in the last 2 or 3 weeks, right? Even Forbes, I think, also released a press release on this, where they essentially kind of said the same thing, which is the winning companies in 2023 will be those with an ROI-centric enablement function. That's the main difference, and I seriously don't believe that can be ignored.